I think you have to allow me to share my screen.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome. We're going to just take a couple of minutes here to allow people to join us, and then we will get started. All right. Welcome to the 14th annual Fox Cities Book Festival and today's event, Memories of a Midwest Girlhood. We are happy to have you here with us virtually today and look forward to gathering in person again next fall. The Fox Cities Book Festival continues to be offered for free to all of our community members. Today's program will be available for viewing after the live event on our Facebook page. The Fox Cities Book Festival is organized by a group of dedicated volunteers and community partners, including public libraries, school districts and universities, bookstores, and individuals giving of their time and talents. We are able to provide these great events without financial barriers, thanks to our generous donors and supporters. They understand the value that access to the arts have on individuals, students, and our greater community. If you think that supporting local writers, building an engaged community of readers, introducing students to authors, and bringing free educational and arts events to our community is important, we encourage you to support the Fox Cities Book Festival. The Book Festival is only possible because of our sponsors. There are many ways you can support the festival, and we thank you in advance for your donation. We ask that during the presentation today, our audience act as good digital citizens, respecting our speaker and each other, following our code of conduct. Any harassment or disrespectful behavior or language will be caused to remove you from today's event. During the presentation, you will have an opportunity to ask questions of our speaker using the Q&A function in Zoom. Type your questions there. We will do our best to answer as many as we can during our time together. Those of you joining us on Facebook, leave your questions in the comments on the Facebook Live video. Now for the moment you've been waiting for. Today, I would like to introduce Peggy Prilaman Marxen. She grew up on a small family farm in northwestern Wisconsin, nurtured by a close-knit rural community and developing a lifelong appreciation of the natural world. She taught fourth grade for 33 years and now lives in Middleton, where she continues to enjoy walking, hiking, and gardening. Peggy, welcome to the festival.
Thank you. Thank you. I want to start by just thanking everyone for who got me here, all of my supportive friends and family, and the Wisconsin State Historical Society, my local editor, and my editors from the State Historical Society. It's been an interesting journey since I'll begin by saying I never planned to write a book, so this is all new to me, but A lot of people wonder why the book came about and how. So I will just say at the outset that though that I always enjoyed writing and reading. And of course, I taught fourth grade for many years, and we studied Wisconsin history. But I retired from teaching a bit earlier than I had planned, had time. And so one of the things I did was to join a Reminiscence writing group in the west side of Madison, which had wonderful facilitators. And over the years, I collected quite a collection of stories about growing up in northern Wisconsin. The people in the group always told me that my stories were very different from theirs because they'd had more urban growings up. So they urged me to put them into a book. And my answer was always, well, maybe someday. And finally, in the fall of 2016, I felt like maybe someday had arrived because I needed something to occupy my time. And so I started working on putting things together with first my local editor. Eventually, when we had gotten it together as we liked it, we sent it on to the proposal to the State Historical Society. And to my delight, they accepted it. So maybe the next slide there. The stories take place in northwestern Wisconsin. This was our 1952 farm family. My father, Freeman Prilaman, my mother, Vera Waldhoft, who was from Birchwood, my brother, Sam, 5 years older, and I. And we grew up in, our official address was Exland, Wisconsin, which is a tiny town of about 200 people and still is. But our social life was made up of the rural community that we lived in. And if you see the map of Wisconsin, where we grew up, you'll see that it's in Sawyer County in northwestern Wisconsin. We lived in the township of Meteor, and we were 5 miles away from the nearest town. So our community was really made up of the families who farmed in the area of Valley View School. Valley View School was our country school 3 miles away, and there are a lot of stories in the book about that, but this kind of gives you the situation as to where we were. But the story goes way back to 1897 when my grandparents met in Indiana. They were both from farm families, and I think you'll see their wedding picture there pretty soon. They were married in 1897 in Morocco, Indiana. They met on the farming country there. They farmed like everybody else there for a few years. Eventually, their first son was born there, Gerald. He would become my Uncle Jerry. And when he was about 1.5 years old, Sam, who had a bit of an itchy foot, announced that he was going to Canada to homestead. So they boarded a train with their first son, traveled to Winnipeg, Manitoba, and secured a homestead there near the tiny town of Starbuck. Well, those were hard years. Their ventures were fraught with hardship. Sam raised horses and sold horses. He had crops, the crops of sugar beets and wheat. Bessie was very lonely there. But finally, 9 years had gone by. My father was born there in 1909. So they had the 2 children, but in 1913, it was decided that they would give up the homestead. And what prompted that was it was the year the sugar beet crop flooded out, losing the crop. At the same time, a spark from a passing train, steam train, lit the their wheat field afire. So it was time to come back. They sold their equipment, the horses, and returned to Indiana. Yeah, that was in 1913. So they settled back in farm country for a short time, but barely settling there, Sam announced that he was going searching once again, this time to find the perfect place. And he bought a newfangled bicycle and he boarded trains to travel the country. He left Bessie and the two boys, who were now 5 and 11, in the care of she and her home folks, and her itinerant husband left. He was gone nearly about 2 years, actually, and she, of course, grew very, very impatient. But Sam wrote letters back. He traveled by train, deboarded the train with his bicycle, explored the area looking for that perfect place. He traveled the country, traveling from Illinois, Missouri, Arkansas, Kentucky, Virginia, still moving on to West Virginia, Washington, D.C., east to Maryland, and all the way west to Colorado. Sometimes he stopped to work, but each time he explored the area, he talked to settlers, assessed the potential for prosperity. Always he posted a letter back to Bessie. How do we know he traveled all those places? Well, when Sam died at the age of 93 in the early 60s, the letters were found in the bottom of an old trunk. And we had known of them, but of course we read them more carefully once he was gone. Anyway, the letters were all there. This is an example of just one letter he wrote back. This was on March 10th, 1914, from Forest Hill, Maryland. Dear wife and sons, I am leaving for Washington, D.C., and then on to Virginia. I know I've been gone quite a while now. Your complaints will not keep me from my search for the perfect place for settling. You must remain patient, for I am not thin but fat, and in better health than when I started. You must get along and quit worrying. Would love to you and the boys, S.C. Prilaman. Well, finally, Bessie got the news she'd been waiting for, but it came in the form of postcards, this time promotional postcards extolling the rich bounty of the lands in Sawyer County, Wisconsin. It showed towering maples, oaks, elms, and other hardwoods, fine flowing streams, and abundant game and large deer with rangy antlers, smiling gardeners in straw hats amid crops of peas and monstrous potatoes, even tobacco, and smiling children at a brand new school building. It was never known whether Sam actually visited northern Wisconsin before choosing this place. There is no record of that. But before long, he had purchased land from the Upper Wisconsin Land Company. Once the stately white pines of the north had been felled and only the pine stumps remained, though there was lots of hardwoods, land barons moved in. The Upper Wisconsin Land Company sold the land, advertised as ready-made farms. In reality, that was rocky pine stump land, and the pine stumps would have to be removed if anyone was going to farm. So Sam returned to Indiana, fetched his family again. They boarded the train once more to northern Wisconsin, and they loaded a few possessions, a cow, a horse, a little bit of equipment, and Bessie's piano. Bessie had given piano lessons all her life and earned the piano went with them. So they waved goodbye to Indiana for good. They arrived in northern Wisconsin. I think there's a picture coming up of the homestead. This was the homestead once they arrived in Exland. Exland was a town named for the crossing of two railroads, and that's where it came from. They disembarked at the Exland Depot, and what they found there was abandoned abandoned train tracks, even train trestles, and logging roads known as tote roads. The tote roads and logging roads now served as well-worn paths that were much used. So the logging heyday was over for the white pine, but the land remained. It was land blessed with good soil. It was strewn with boulders and rocks in this perfect place. It was covered with pine stumps, and Sam knew little of the long, bitter winters, deep snow, and very short growing season. So in the photo, this is Sam on the left, Bessie on the right, Gerald, my dad, Freeman, and the land agent there in the white shirt, and Uncle Dave. This is the existing cabin they moved into. It was with their animals and so forth. They eked out a living with the horses, a cow or two, a huge garden, and with hope, hard work, and determination, they persevered. Eventually, they built a frame home down across the creek. So Badger Creek here begins to be the player in this story that ties what would become three families together. Then their white clapboard house was built a short distance from here. Actually, during the 30s, in the Depression, it was built. Well, one story that I never tired of hearing as a kid was the story that my dad and his best friend told, was the story of their meeting, which shortly after they arrived, about a year after they had arrived in the wilderness, the two, Bessie and Freeman, took off in the summertime with berry buckets in hand to pick wild raspberries. They'd been warned that there were bears out picking raspberries at the very same time, so they were very cautious. So unbeknownst to them, Belle Carlson and her son, Ole Carlson, a tow-headed Norwegian, had set out from their homestead about a mile away, also to pick wild raspberries. When the bushes rattled nearby, each family was certain it was a bear, but instead the two mothers emerged with boys in tow. The boys were elated to find one another, as were the mothers. It had been a year and neither knew that the other family was there. Well, the two boys became the very best of friends. They attended Valley View School together. They hunted and fished, supplemented the family table with their work, and explored the entire area. Eventually, they grew up together. Uncle Jerry, when they arrived here, had been 13 years old, and he had had enough of education. He headed straight to the woods, and even at that tender age, joined a logging crew. So Jerry never continued his education. But as they grew up, they all went searching for dating and wives. And the way that was done in those days was to pile into an old car, if the car ran, if the weather was right, no mud or snow or whatever. Dances were held on Saturday night in all of the nearby communities, or one of them, Birchwood, Exland, Radisson, Winter. That was where Dad met Vera Walhoft, who would become my mother. So soon the two were dating and spending time together on Saturday night, Sunday afternoon, when Freeman's car worked and it wasn't mired in the mud, or they didn't have to work. There were a lot of things. Well, the two dated for a long time, actually 7 years went by before finally they married. And I'll tell more about that in a minute. But why did it take so long? Well, first thing was that my dad had purchased 40 acres of land, and he was clearing that land for a farm. The land was just up the creek along Badger, about a mile. That would be the home I would grow up. But meantime, the Depression had intervened. It was the Depression, there was little work, it was hard times. And while most farm families survived better than most because they had their own gardens and food and meat and chickens and so forth, my dad remembered one lean year when there was very little left in springtime except for a few withered cabbages and a few shriveled potatoes, after saving a few of the potatoes to plant that spring. But back to mom and dad, eventually, I think there's a picture then of, yes, this is where they met. Finally, on an ordinary Sunday afternoon, May 23rd, 1938, Freeman's car purred cooperatively enough to pick up my mom in Birchwood. To the surprise of everything in that fresh and fragrant May afternoon, the two drove away to Shell Lake, Wisconsin. Birchwood was in Washburn County, and Shell Lake was the county seat. They drove there, they summoned the Methodist minister at the parsonage, his wife as attending witness, and Freeman, who was then 29, Vera 26, tied the marriage knot. Well, where did they return to? There was no home yet. They returned to Badger Creek and lived with his parents for the next almost 2 years, I think. They built their home on Badger Creek. And here's where Badger Creek becomes the connecting link between the three families. I think there's a picture of it there somewhere. I didn't think much about that creek as a child. Everyone had a creek nearby, though none quite as close as ours right outside our back door. Badger Creek and its companion Tote Road shaped our lives. The creek fed us literally, mentally, and spiritually. We sat alongside its reflecting pools and pondered life's questions. We marveled at the wildflowers of spring, the deepening snows of winter, the vivid colors of fall. In the springtime, the melting snow flowed away in rushing torrents down Badger Creek, washing away the icy snowpack of winter. In the summer, enormous claps of thunder rolled over the hills in hollow echoes and all-day downpours. The aphorism, "If the creek don't rise," had real meaning to us, for more times than I can count, the creek raged to heights, threatened flood, and lapped at our doorstep. It washed away the bridge at the end of our dead-end road more times than I could count, temporarily stranding us. But in the warmth of summer, Badger could dry to no more than a trickle before returning to autumn's soothing melodic flow. Our lives were marked by the many moods of Badger. As kids, Sam and Shirley, who was now our cousin Shirley, was between us in age. That was Jerry and Millie's daughter. Sam, Shirley, and I built dams of rock and stone, creating pools of water. We watched trout dart from side to side in overhanging banks. We caught water striders, danced from rock to rock while exploring creekside boulders and animal paths. Badger Creek was our entertainment. Well, back to the newlyweds. The newlyweds lived with Dad's parents, and they walked up the creek each day along the old Tote Road while building their home. Dad had cleared the land for farming. He had cut logs that would go into their log home, but the home wasn't built yet, so Mom helped with that. Now, Mom was a town girl. She learned a lot of country farm skills once she was there, but she did not know how to drive a horse, and certainly not a lively horse of Dad's named Joe, because that would be what was needed to build their log home and move the logs into place. Dad had to be available to maneuver the logs. Somehow or another, though, the task was completed, probably with the help of Ole, his lifelong friend. So the the house was completed and they moved in to their, what I would know as our first home it was built onto, but first it was a 2-room log house. Well, with endless hard work and family help through the years, Mom and Dad built their dairy farm. Dad logged and hunted and made maple syrup to supplement the income. Mom maintained the household with gardening and canning. At first, without electricity, running water, and an outdoor toilet served as our bathroom. Well, by the time I was growing up, it seemed like the land had been tamed a bit. It was the perfect place to me. And the community that we lived in was the Valley View community. It formed every bit of our social life. In addition to that, we would go to town on Saturday night to get groceries, just as every farm family did. It was the highlight of the week to go to town, see all of your friends, get the groceries and visit. Sometimes there were dances or movies and things like that too. But Valley View shaped our community. And I think now there's maybe a picture of the school. First our house. This would be the basic part. There was the beginning of our house. It was added on to 3 or 4 times. And the creek is over on the left side. Then we moved on to Valley View School. Well, Valley View School was not only the school, it was the social center of the neighborhood. Everyone came to events at Valley View School at least once a month, whether they had kids there or not. And I started school at the age of 5. Here I'm in the second row from the left, second back there. So one bright August morning, I climbed aboard the battered back fender of Sam's red bicycle, excited to be on my way to first grade as a 5-year-old. There were no kindergarten in country schools then. I clutched his waist tightly as he pedaled down the dusty gravel road, too excited to notice Mom's worried look as she snapped a last-minute photo. And we were off on our 3-mile ride to Valley View. 10-year-old Sam introduced me to our new teacher, that's this one, Miss Olson, with an inauspicious, "This is my little sister Peggy, she don't talk much." And that was owing to the fact that I was very shy. Desks of wood and wrought iron ranged in straight rows lined my country classroom seating for nearly 30 students, ages 5 to 13. First graders sat in the small desks next to the long backward on the west wall, while 8th graders occupied the larger desks looking to the east-facing windows on Valley View Road. The other school in the community was Meteor School, equally distant for us, 3 miles away, but we chose Valley View. But either one, getting to school was a matter of biking, sledding, walking, or sometimes running. As we picked up neighbor kids along the way, every day was a brand new venture. We never crossed the Badger Creek Bridge downstream on Valley View Road without stopping to look for trout dashing for cover under the bridge, slimy frogs and warty toads. The resounding clang, it was easy to lose track of time. The resounding clangs of the early morning school bell jolted us into action. With no time to waste, we panicked, racing breathlessly, our hearts pumping hard over the last mile to school, gasping, sides aching. The Valley View Road kids, about a quarter of the school, slipped into our desks just as the bell rang its final bong. In wintertime, that schoolhouse was buffeted by northern winds, rattling the windows. The furnace in the front of the room was no match for the old school building without insulation, and the fire burned fitfully, leaving the corners of the room frigid. Sometimes a teacher's worth was measured as much if she could teach a good lesson as if she could build a good fire and keep it going. Some teachers had this experience and skill to do both. But even so, we pulled on our winter gear every morning, noon, and afternoon recess, and for the walk home, whether it was dry or not, and went out to play and to walk home in our gear. In the wintertime, unbroken snow called for cutting the pie for a game of fox and goose in the fresh snow. We played King of the Hill, surviving bumps and bruises and snowball fights with sometimes icy snowballs, leaving us with bruises. But we were always outside playing. Well, of all of the events at Valley View School throughout the year, the biggest event was always the Christmas program. Mrs. Carlson, our next teacher after this one, Miss Olson, Mrs. Carlson did not play or did not want to play the black piano that stood at the front of our classroom. So she delegated the task to Mrs. Jacobson, Mid, short for Millie. Mid walked across the cow pasture that separated our schoolhouse from her farmhouse. She took her place on the black piano bench, separated the black piano bench, her back to us, and swayed at the tall piano as she pounded out songs she knew so well she could gaze out the window toward her farmhouse and barn. One December morning, Mid thumped hard on that piano, trying to maintain our focus one last time. The Christmas program was fast approaching, and we'd grown a bit weary of rehearsal. We watched her hefty frame move from side to side on the creaky bench, mesmerized by her behind swaying in rhythm. As she broke into a rousing chorus of joy to the world, our attention turned to a resounding crack. All four bench legs of that piano folded inward in a stunning display of symmetry, dumping Mrs. Mid Jacobson's rear end onto the unforgiving schoolroom floor. There was a collective gasp, a moment of dead silence, and then every child broke into uncontrollable laughter. Some fell from their desks howling. Some could not stop, as Mrs. Carlson commanded, even while she hurried to Mrs. Jacobson's aid. Fortunately, she was unhurt, but laughter reverberated even as Mid rose to her feet, gathered her coat and a morsel of dignity, even as she rushed, red-faced from the schoolhouse without a word, laughter still ringing in her ears. Mid marched home across the pasture. Mrs. Carlson gave us the tongue lashing we would not soon forget and probably deserve. We hung our heads in shame. At the same time, fearful, we burst into yet another fit of giggles. In short form, the piano bench was sturdily repaired just in time for the Christmas program. On that night, Mrs. Jacobson returned, holding her head high. Without flinching, she slid into place on the restored bench. With heroic effort all around, Mid displayed perfect composure. We contained our snickers, and the Christmas program progressed and concluded without a hitch. The curtains closed while the schoolhouse echoed with the applause of an approving audience for the resounding finale, Joy to the World. Well, that was just one of many, many events I talk about at Valley View School. But eventually, sadly, even for kids like me at fourth grade, the school succumbed to statewide consolidation. Valley View and most of the country schools consolidated, moving to schools in the nearby town. In our case, that was excellent. But that ended a long, long era of socialization at Valley View School. It was a sad day for everyone, adults and kids alike. And then our attention turned to the other chance at socialization with our neighbors and friends, and that was going to town on Saturday night, going to Exland, 5 miles away. Well, most times when we went to Exland, one of the things we did was to go to Taylor's gas station in town. And now I'm going to highlight just a few of the eccentric and interesting people that I knew as a kid that I remember very fondly. One of them was Annie Taylor, Harry Taylor's wife at the station. Annie always filled our tank, checked the oil, pumped gas or kerosene into red metal cans for home use. Reaching over to clean the windshield, she babbled as she worked. Annie's high-pitched, always excited voice spread the latest news as she bustled about Exland. She wore a house dress with a flowing skirt, partially covered by an apron, flapping in the breeze, and dumpy rolled socks, which she paired alternatively with either high water boots or scruffy bedroom slippers. Strands of her hair always escaped from the scarf knotted around her head. Annie dressed funny, but her heart was pure gold. She routinely carried an envelope in which she collected for good causes, flowers for a funeral, or something for a family in need. She sold red paper poppies for the American Legion or dimes for the Red Cross. She collected them. Anyway, Annie was one of those characters, much loved characters. One of those characters would be my Uncle Jerry. He's sprinkled throughout the book in often outrageous ways. He was a adventurous farmer trying new things. He was big and loud and boisterous and well known throughout the area. His personality completely unlike his father, Sam, my grandpa, or my dad. Everyone knew of him. He either irritated them or they loved getting in sparring bouts with him verbally. Anyway, he was a very interesting character that you will read about. But our other really favorite people in the neighborhood were as dear to us as our own grandparents, Rob and Iny. Everyone loved visiting Rob and Iny's house. Friends, neighbors, and strangers alike were made instantly welcome in their home. Rob would emerge from his workshop to greet guests puffing on his pipe, clenched loosely in his teeth. He always wore a faded shirt, patched overalls, and pants held up by wide yellow Brace brand suspenders. In much of winter and summer too, he wore long underwear, tattered at the collar, patched by his wife, Iny, and a red bandana always trailed from his back pocket. His husky frame told of Iny's good home cooking. Rob was jovial, soft-spoken, and congenial. He never spoke a harsh word against anyone. And he loved teaching kids to whittle and teaching long-forgotten skills. Well, Iny, his wife, had a little edge to her personality that you will read about, but she was a very lovable person nevertheless. In or out of the kitchen, she was a woman of many talents. She was a proficient seamstress. She worked away on her treadle sewing machine, patching, sewing, and mending. She knit woolen intermittents for Rob's deerskin outer leather mitts, and she darned his socks. She knit and crocheted gifts for babies and brides alike. A visit to Rob and Iny's house was like a visit to a time capsule, a lesson, receiving lesson in reusing and making do. In their daily routine in all kinds of weather, Iny carried buckets of water from the pump. Rob carried in wood for the wood stove. Then each of them followed the narrow path to the outhouse. They lived resourcefully, maintained a huge garden, and planting their garden by the advice of the old farmer's almanac, which hung on a nail and a string in their kitchen for easy reference. Potatoes always planted on Good Friday, and planting by the phases of the moon. Whether at home, visiting, or traveling the dusty roads to town, they always drove an old green pickup we dubbed the Green Hornet. It had been brush painted green, that Ford pickup. We loved to hear them coming down the lane to visit us, but they always bumped around in that old pickup like a pair of salt and pepper shakers, always together. And one of Inie's eccentricities was that she always carried a long flashlight with lots of batteries, ready for everything. She tested it often, even in the middle of the morning. She was worried about that flashlight. She also carried a huge purse she clutched under her arm as if someone were going to snatch it away. It was filled with tidbits of information she had gleaned from the newspapers and kept together in rubber bands. Want to know when Easter is next year? Inie was on it. She had the answer. Trout fishing or bird hunting next fall? She knew when it was. Well, Rob weathered Inie's eccentricities, ups and downs, and mood swings unshaken. The most alarming thing Rob ever said at the news of something was, "Well, I'll be gall darned." So those were the lovable people that we knew. I often think of Rob and Inie's little house beside the road, the faint light of gas and kerosene lamps shining through their windows. After darkness fell, in the warmth of that room, they sat in wooden rocking chairs, reading by dim, flickering lamplight. Rob believed electricity was unnecessary, proclaiming, "Them bright lights will ruin your eyes." So they never had electricity until very, very, very late in life. I remember Rob each fall, and Inie, when Rob and I shared an October birthday. He'd often say, "There's no better way to celebrate a birthday than under a full harvest moon and a slab of Inie's pumpkin pie." I had to agree. Well, thank you for listening. Someone has written of my book that it was a book of heart, humor, and hardship, and I thought that was an apt description. So thank you. Thanks again to everybody who got me here. Thank you much, and to the Fox Book Festival.
All right, thank you very much for sharing with us today. I am going to look for the Q&A and see if there's anything there. I don't see anything in the Q&A, so if anybody has any questions, feel free to go ahead and ask those there. I was just going to start out. Are there still family people living on the property along Badger Creek?
No, there aren't. It's passed on to other owners, although I still own some land in the area there. But no, nobody on
Okay.
that.
All right. And are you ever still in contact with any of the descendants of your neighbors that you of that area at all?
Oh,
anymore,
yes.
Or
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
We grew up together, and so yeah, I return often, and sure.
That's fantastic. We do have one question that just came in. What was your motivation for writing this? You have done what I wish I could do. That was from Denise, one of our listeners today.
Well, I remembered the 50s as a kinder, gentler time, and very nourishing. I felt like my community supported me. If you read the book, you will know that hard times came along, and the community always supported us through those. It was maybe it's through the eyes of childhood, but I always remember it as a time of kindness, and that it seems like everybody got along together. I don't think that could have been true, but through a child's eyes it did. And I just figured it was kind of a time to revisit a time that at least some of us remember, that's long gone. And people seem to be now returning to the land and wanting some of what we maybe had. So I figured they would enjoy reading about what it was like.
Do you have any other projects that you're working on at this point? Potentially any more stories of your family or a different generation of stories?
Not at this time, probably not. This is probably the the work of my lifetime.
A one and done. Okay.
One and done.
All right. That's good. And how did the rest of your family take the idea of you writing all of these stories down to share with the rest of the world?
They seemed happy enough with it. Yeah. They were fine. My cousin Shirley agreed. My brother said it was all right, which is good enough comment from him. Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. Oh, one more here. You have such vivid memories. How did you tap into those memories, and who helped you along the way to do that?
Well, people tell me that I have very vivid memories, and I honestly tell them I did not make up any of the details. Everything that I remember vividly. But I can tell you that the Reminiscence writing group, hearing other people's stories, really also helped me to tap into things that had happened to me as a child. So listening to other people's stories was like priming the pump. And but I do remember those times fondly. So I guess I just have a good memory for details, because I see those things in my head.
Okay. Do you have any advice for anyone that is looking to maybe do something similar for their own memories?
Well, joining a Reminiscence writing group was a wonderful prompt. You get to know things about people that probably even close friends do not know, but it also just feeds your own jolting of memories. So the Reminiscence writing group and the facilitators were just excellent in doing that. And I had the benefit of writing the stories, the collection of stories, having them banked, and then going to them to mine them for putting this together with the help of a local editor first, who moved it into book form.
So this is something you've been doing for a while, trying to physically write down the stories of your childhood and the memories that you have, so that you had those stories already written and were able to then compile them into a
just remembering bits of things. Someone described it as clothesline writing. When you think of a memory that you remember, think of it as a piece on a clothesline, that you take that one down and write down that memory, and then you have a whole collection you could put together at some later time. But it definitely helped doing it over all of these years. I think it's too huge a project to just sit down and decide that you're going to write a book. At least for me, that was the case.
Yeah. Someone is also asking, how would you find a Reminiscence group like that? Is that something that there's an organization for, or is that through a Facebook thing, or how did you find that group of people?
There may be an organization, but there were several groups that I guess first they were actually through senior centers. I was only in my late 50s when I started writing these things, but the a lot of times the senior center will have an outreach group that's a reminiscence writing group. So that was the case here, and probably your area will too.
Okay. All right. Does anybody else have any questions at this point? We're kind of getting to a point here where not seeing much else coming in. I am going to go ahead here and paste into the chat for everyone to see a link to a survey. And so I'm sorry, I'm kind of distracted a little bit about that as well. And then it's a donation link as well, if you'd like to make a donation. So the first one, I believe, is the donation. And then the second one is the survey, and that goes to everybody, so you can do that. And then another question just came in. This is encouraging since I have just written a few memories into short stories. So that's, they're saying that that process sounds like it's an encouraging idea. So that's appreciative of that. Always looking to encourage those that are trying to do things on their own too. So.
And get someone to help. You know, it helps to have an editor or someone that you, like a facilitator. Our facilitators were so excellent. They could give you really good advice.
All right. Well, then I'm going to go through and do our closing announcements here, and then I think we will sign off. So thank you for joining us for today's event. The festival continues through Sunday evening. Visit foxcitiesbookfestival.org or the events page on Facebook to see who is still to come. If you would like to support future festival events, free and open to the public, we encourage you to make a donation. A link to learn more about donating is in the chat of this presentation. We also ask that you take the brief survey that we've provided to give your feedback as we begin planning for the 2022 festival season. And that link is also in the chat, like I said. Thank you, Peggy, for joining us today. We really, truly appreciate it. And we are appreciative of your addition to the 2021 Fox Cities Book Festival as we connect our readers and readers to writers like you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, and have a great day.